Okay, we'll start letting folks in. Oh, Heather, we have already got folks popping in. They are clearly very excited to be here with you today.
Wonderful. I am truly as excited.
You're so lovely. All right. And through the magic of media, we are going ahead and getting the Facebook Live up as well so that we can expand our virtual community today. Looks like we are good to go there. All right. Let's see who we've got with us today so far. See some familiar names there. We've got some of our Basque consultants and some other lovely individuals. I see we've got one individual that's calling in. So I'm mindful that it is already 4 o'clock. So we'll go ahead and do a little bit of housekeeping and then turn it over to the lovely Heather Anderson. A gentle reminder to everyone, please know that we do have the 2022 Southeastern School Behavioral Health Conference coming up here April 28th and 29th. We would love to have you present with us either in person in Myrtle Beach or you can attend virtually. There's more information about that on www.schoolbehavioralhealth.org. We did extend our registration, our regular registration rates today, so that gives us a little bit more flexibility there. On behalf of the Southeastern School Behavioral Health Community and the Behavioral Alliance of South Carolina, I would like to welcome you all to this month's national webinar. We are so lucky to have with us today Heather Anderson. She is a school counselor here in South Carolina, working with Charleston County School District. She's going to be talking to us today about some critical content areas around social emotional learning, and we're very excited about that. Before I turn it over to Heather and let her share a little bit more about herself, please know that you can type any of your questions or comments into the chat box. If you would like to speak anonymously to Heather, you can also type into the Q&A. Welcome to those of you that are joining us on Facebook. If you have any questions or comments on Facebook, please type those in the comments below, and I will make sure to share those with Heather today as well. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pop up our pre-survey and invite Heather to share her screen. We'll take about 1 minute and 30 seconds to go over that pre-survey, if that, and then we will go ahead and jump into this month's presentation. All right. So if y'all would be so kind, we've just got a brief 3-question survey here. Give us a little bit of feedback on who all we have with us, so I can share that with Heather, and that way we can make sure that any of the comments or questions that Heather may have for the group can be tailored to our audience. I believe if you're joining in on the phone, you can press *67 to unmute yourself if you have any questions or comments throughout the presentation. All right, so we do have some teachers here with us today, Heather, some professors, mental health professionals, so we've got a good dynamic audience with us. Level of knowledge on the subject. We've got some varying degrees of comfortability, some here at a 4, some down at a 2, so that means we're gonna have some great conversation and we'll have some good questions and comments in the chat. And seems like the content is very relevant. So I'm gonna go ahead and close out our poll now and turn it over to Heather.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is so nice to be here virtually with you. And although I cannot see all of you, it's what I have been looking forward to all afternoon, a way to connect. And that's really what this presentation is about. You see the title of it, Social and Emotional Learning, fitting it all together at every tier. And I tell you what, after a long rainy day in Charleston, I think we're going to hit the playlist and just do a quick reset.
Ever get a sign the universe is trying to tell you something?
Clouds are all around us.
Not that one. That's the one.
This like sets the tone.
years. So bring your good times and your laughter too. We're gonna celebrate your party with you. Come on. Celebration. Let's all celebrate and have a good time. Celebration. We're gonna celebrate and have a good time. It's time to come together. It's up to you. What's your pleasure? Everyone around the world, come on. Yeah. It's your celebration. Celebrate good times, come on. Celebrate good times, come on.
There's a party going on right here, a celebration to last throughout the years.
So bring your good times and your laughter too.
We gonna celebrate your party with you. Come on now.
And I'm going to pause it right there. I could listen to that song for the rest, but go ahead and just put in the chat box. Tell me something that you are celebrating, whether it is something you're looking forward to, something that makes you smile, brings joy to your life, just a way to actually acknowledge things that make us smile. So as you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Again, just in the chat box, something that makes you smile, something that you're celebrating. I told you that song is such a celebratory time for me after a rainy day here.
We've got some folks celebrating the warm weather, which is definitely something I'm celebrating as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Taylor. Absolutely.
The weekend is almost here. That's another one. I'm here with you on that one, Susan. Movie night with my family.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys, for participating. I just want to give you a little bit of background about myself. So I am Heather Anderson, and by education, I am a school counselor by heart and passion. I'm a true champion of social and emotional learning, and I've seen firsthand, not only as a researcher, as a practitioner, as a coach and trainer, and a collaborator, I've seen how social and emotional learning can truly change the trajectory of the school climate, of the teacher-student relationships, of parent relationships, and really positive outcomes. I have been school-based and then back into the district, and now I've just returned to back school-based. And I just feel like such an honor to be able to share with you my implementation story. A quick snapshot is I came to Charleston County School District in 2013, and I was hired as a school counselor in a school that was then labeled, and I don't think we do this anymore, but an inverted triangle, meaning that more than 80% of our students were not making their benchmarks or their academic gains, as well as some of their behavioral documented barriers, and found out very quickly that I needed to be a part of a change agent that was going to help support this school building at all tiers, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and that I could not meet the needs of all the target audiences as a crisis counselor. So then, after many hours of trying to come up with some true data points in our MTSS meetings, I was doing a lot of research and trying to find a program or curricula that was data-driven and research-based, that I could not only facilitate as a school counselor, but also support educators in my building. And that's what I did. In 2014, we rolled out a social and emotional curriculum. I was a big cheerleader for this. I was in 16 classes per week, facilitating these lessons with teachers. And really by 2017, the teachers said, we don't really want you in here, Ms. Anderson, anymore. We want to facilitate these lessons. And it gave me more time to focus on other tiers of implementation, basically at that tier 2 and tier 3. And during that time, I was able to do great things with such as small groups, create a social and emotional learning lab, and also really integrate SEL in all aspects of the day. In 2017, I left being a school-based counselor to widen my circle of influence and became a district coach supporting district leadership teams, teacher teams, admin teams, and helping them build systems around their SEL implementation. And at that time in 2021, we had 85% of full SEL implementation at every elementary school, and really proud to say that we have 100% at our middle school for our SEL programs. And so at the end of the year last year, after holding this district position and working with teacher and leadership teams, I really felt the tug to be back school-based, and was hired as an SEL counselor at one of our larger middle schools here in Charleston County, whereas I serve on a team, and really part of my job is really to support all target audiences, to include teachers, students, parents, and caregivers, and to support students in all 3 tiers. The TIERS, even though there have been some tiers, some real tiers at my school today, but supporting them in their foundational with that tier 1, tier 2, which is that sum, and then the tier 3, the more targeted. So my goal today is to be able to, as much as we can, interact around the outcomes of implementation. And I want to give you like the zoom out of the research wise, some talking points for you to be able to go back and what we talk about today to put into place tomorrow. And so I want to give you this research around social and emotional learning and the policymakers and what we know around the science. And then I'm going to switch from there to the systemic implementation of that, how to create systems of support that actually are sustainable, that don't have anything to do with us as people. We want to create systems and we don't want things to be people dependent. And then when we're talking about these systems, certainly how do we sustain this? So I'm going to show this quick video on CASTLE, the Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning. They're the think tanks, the policymakers behind SEL. And then we will.
I'm a data guy, I like numbers, and we have a lot of evidence that social emotional learning has made a difference.
We had a graduation rate of 62%. Last year, we put up a record-breaking 84%.
Over the last 5 years, our expulsions have been cut in half.
We were suspending about 13,000 days of out-of-school suspension. We were 10 times the average for any school district in Ohio. And within that first year alone, we were able to reduce our out-of-school suspensions by 55%.
Attendance rates went up. We know that attendance is directly correlated to academic improvement and achievement, but it also had other outcomes that were extremely important, which is students feeling more connected to schools, educators having to think outside the box, helping students overcome some of the challenges that are in their life.
There's an 11-to-1 return on investment. So for every dollar invested in programming around social emotional learning, we're seeing that they're saving $11 on remedial programs, dropout prevention. There's lots of reasons that people are coming to the conclusion that this is something that we need to be prioritizing.
So when we talk about the research of SEL, we know that from research which demonstrates that in education that promotes social and emotional learning, we have a positive impact on a wide range of outcomes, kind of like what that video said. And so again, want to take a moment and just, this is a great activity to do with full staff. Sometimes if you're in a very homogeneous group, heterogeneous group of educators, of building leaders, like what are some of the challenges that our students face? You can put in the chat box, what are some things that our students are carrying metaphorically in their backpacks before they even walk through the doors of our building? And then what skills are needed? And so when I talk to teacher teams about the why of SEL, we start with this exercise. And again, what are the challenges that students face and what are the skills that are needed? And thinking this paradigm shift from how do we support students at all levels?
So we're starting to get some responses coming in. Gentle reminder, y'all can please type your responses in the chat box and I'll share them with Heather. We've got dual pandemic issues, social unrest, trauma, and they need strategies to deal with that, neglect and abuse.
Absolutely. And love all of those. You're right. Dual traumas, dual pandemics. And so, there's going to be some statistics later on in this presentation, but what we're metaphorically carrying in our backpacks, whether we're talking about adults or students, it really does impede us from being ready to learn, ready to communicate and all of this. And so what I propose is that social and emotional learning, especially the data-driven, research-based, we are able to meet the needs of students in these skill deficits. Because while we have to think about circle of influence and what we can control and what we can't, we do know that students and adults are coming to us with these barriers and challenges. And so how do we meet them and meet the needs of them? And so what skills are needed? These are the social and emotional skills that we're going to talk about today. So creating a space and a place for intentional social and emotional learning. Again, creating a space and a place for intentional social and emotional learning. This is one of the last videos I'm going to show. I'm sorry, they're all front loaded in the beginning, but I think it's important to create this foundation. So as we continue this conversation of how this is going to systemically look, we have the foundation of the research and other things.
Think about the young people in your lives and all the different places where they're learning about themselves, how to relate to others, and work together on goals. How can we intentionally create learning experiences that will help all young people develop and maintain positive relationships, become lifelong learners, and contribute to a more caring, just world? Educators, researchers, community members, families, and the students themselves agree. What we need is social and emotional learning, or SEL. SEL is the process through which young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that help us to understand ourselves, connect with others, achieve our goals, and support our communities. We all need opportunities to learn and engage in environments where we feel safe, valued, and a sense of belonging. So how does SEL help schools, families, and communities work together so that all young people have these kinds of learning experiences and achieve success in education, careers, and life? CASTLE's framework identifies 5 areas of competence that together help us develop a healthy sense of who we are, manage stress, understand the views of others, and work together to create schools and communities where everyone can grow their strengths and interests. Self-awareness is about how we think about ourselves and who we are. It includes understanding our culture, our thoughts, feelings, and what we believe we're capable of, and understanding how these things can influence our behaviors and beliefs. Self-management is the ability to manage those emotions, thoughts, and actions in different situations so that we can achieve individual and collective goals. This includes coping with stress and anxiety, persevering through challenges, and taking action to create positive change. Social awareness is how we understand others, how we learn to take different perspectives and empathize even with people who are different from us. It also includes understanding how the broader norms and systems around us influence how we develop and create a sense of belonging. Relationship skills are how we connect and engage effectively with others, and how we form lasting friendships and connections. This includes communicating clearly, solving problems together, managing conflict and disagreements, and standing up for ourselves and the rights of others. Lastly, responsible decision-making is how we put it all together to make caring and constructive choices. This includes thinking critically about consequences, analyzing the impact of our actions on ourselves and others, and identifying solutions that support our collective well-being. We continue to develop and practice SEL throughout our lives and can adapt and apply these competencies across different contexts and cultures. How we develop SEL is impacted by our environments, which is why we need to work together across classrooms, schools, families, and communities. In the classroom, students can be explicitly taught SEL skills and also can practice and apply SEL during core subjects, like discussing different perspectives in social studies and language arts, or collaboratively problem solving in science or math. SEL is most effective when supported by evidence-based programs and trusting relationships where students are treated as partners in their learning. Beyond the classroom, SEL can be intentionally promoted throughout the school experience, from the way they're greeted in the morning to how discipline practices are carried out and how adults themselves develop and model positive relationships and the SEL competencies. Outside of school, families and caregivers provide the earliest and ongoing learning and interactions for their children, so it's important that schools listen to and authentically partner with families to help shape SEL priorities and strategies for supporting their children. Similarly, when schools partner with community organizations to align their efforts, SEL opportunities can be strengthened and students benefit even more. With SEL, we can help create schools and learning spaces where all young people feel connected, inspired, engaged, and ready to contribute to the world around them.
Awesome. So again, just a quick recap of what they were talking about is the 5 core competencies. And then when we think about systemic implementation, we're not just thinking about the classroom, we're thinking about the entire building. And then we're also making sure we're identifying all of our target audiences to include our families and caregivers along with communities. So the slide previous to that, I had this, these 3 words, mirror best practices. So today, again, this zoom out of systemic implementation in a building, and then actually the zoom in on how this can look in a classroom. And these practices are going to mirror each other. So it's not like we're doing something for a building that we're going to do differently for a classroom. They layer on all of the supports as well as the interventions. So I've added this infographic to this presentation because I think it's important to make sure that when we have conversations about being SEL multipliers, we really can help separate the fact from fiction about what SEL is and what SEL is not. I think education information is so powerful, and making sure we define appropriately what SEL is doing is these skills to help bolster students for academic successes, but also in and out of the classroom. So I empower people in my building with this, separating fact from fiction so they understand. And also we talk about this wheel a lot, about the different stakeholders and the different tiers and how this looks. So some of the research, and again, this presentation is going to be available to you. Some of the research in these next few slides are, we know that through meta-analysis through CASTLE, again, the Collaborative for Academic and Social and Emotional Learning, we know these data points. We know that through this intentionality of social and emotional learning and with fidelity, we know that we will, that it leads to improved academic outcomes, long-term goals, it's a financial investment, and then overall will improve these lifetime outcomes. And again, this meta-analysis that I just referenced here is the data point on that, and the science leads to student gains around social and emotional skills, positive classroom behavior, We've got this data point on standardized achievement tests, and again, reducing conduct problems and emotional distress. You know, that was one of the things we talked about, what kids are carrying in their metaphorical backpacks, this emotional distress, as well as skill deficits of focus, of positive self-talk, emotion management. These are all skills that are taught in SEL programs. Love this next slide because I toggle back and forth with SEL because it is not a practice just for students, right? Castle said many years ago that if they could rewind 30 years when they first were formed, they would have done a campaign to really empower and connect with adults around social and emotional learning before actually building curricula or endorsing policy with students around social and emotional learning. But we know, again, through data that teachers who possess social and emotional competencies are more likely to stay in the classroom longer. And we also know that this is a real barrier right now about, again, the emotional distress of teachers and educators and building leaders. But when we have these high levels of social competence, we're better able to protect ourselves. I always like to pause here and say that social and emotional wellness is not a mastery skill set. My teenagers will tell you that although I have been facilitating social and emotional learning for more than a decade, I still struggle with emotion management with them some days. We certainly learn these skill sets, but in knowing that this is not a mastery when we're talking about emotion management, problem solving, and things like that. Again, another research point about what people are saying, what teachers are saying, what employers are saying. You know, we're near Boeing, Boeing here in Charleston, and a data point that we received is, these skill sets, skill deficiencies of team building, of collaboration, of perspective taking. These are skill sets that are showing up as a deficit for employers. They're able to teach them the technical skills. It's these other, what we used to call soft skills, but these social and emotional learning skills. And then again, parents, an important part of the target audience. This slide is very powerful. And for those of you who are able to see the slide deck, I'm just going to stop for a second and let you read this. And it makes sense, right? We know the biggest predictor in a building is the building leader for sustainability. I think of this equation sometimes that I use with building leaders, and I sandwich this. I talk to building leaders, if you are going to introduce any new curricula in your building, right, you have to have support, and we are support people. We can support this new curricula, whether we're talking academics or social and emotional wellness. And then you have to have an accountability piece. So you have support and accountability, and those are the two sandwiches. And in the middle is where the momentum takes place. And we know, again, through research that a school leader is the biggest predictor of whether change takes hold. And it's that support plus accountability. We're now moving into the systemic implementation. And I can pause for a second, Taylor, to see if we have any questions about the research or perhaps how we provide research or talking to our different target audiences. And if there's not any questions, I can continue to move on.
So I think folks are just enjoying learning from you right now. If anything pops up into the chat, I will make sure to go ahead and send that your way though.
Perfect. So again, this is that next piece of the presentation when we talk about going into the systemic implementation and what that looks like. So in Charleston County and really the state of South Carolina, we anchor to this framework of the multi-tiered system of support. And we need to make sure that SEL is not another thing that we are adding to our very full plate, right? It is the plate. It's not something that we're taking the place of numeracy or literacy, but it's something to build upon and empower engagement and have kids to be ready to learn. And so when we think about that, we need to really think about systemic implementation and anchoring it to our MTSS framework. So I've gained the most momentum in talking about social and emotional wellness in buildings when I talk about mirroring best practices for academics as we would have for the implementation of social and emotional learning. And I give this example of if you're a first grade teacher and you're teaching letter sounds or phonics to your class, and you're working on the S sound, you are not going to introduce the S sound one week and never revisit it again, or never practice it. You're never going to model and reinforce the skills and how the S sound, and then perhaps in a few weeks, you're going to add a blend to that sound. That is a very, very simplistic way to look at academics. And it's the same way for looking at behaviors and social and emotional learning, right? We want to teach it. We want to reteach it. We want to model it. We want to give kids chances to explore and practice it. And that is how we anchor our social and emotional implementation to our MTSS framework when we think about the universals, the targeted, and intensive. It is really just the simplicity of best practices and how we meet the needs of all students. I love that image on the right of my scale that I built on the left of mirroring, because I think it's very important to remind our stakeholders that social and emotional learning is not something that we do on a Monday morning during meeting time, morning meeting, and never revisit again, right? It is something that is integrated and infused in everything that we do. And just because someone goes into a small group doesn't mean they don't have access to your universal SEL lesson. Or just because someone goes into a check-in, check out as a tier 2 doesn't mean they don't have access. And again, we do the same practices with that with academics. So this is what we kind of model our systemic implementation of SEL here in Charleston County. And this is, again, another graphic just to show you that our district MTSS team, our school teams, and then our PLCs as professional learning communities, and how this, again, is infiltrated. So we have Second Step as our social and emotional learning curriculum in pre-K all the way through middle school. And this is how this looks on these different levels with different MTSS teams. And so it's continuous. So Second Step is our tier 1, right? The district, and then how this looks when we're looking at data and implementation practices of Second Step at our school MTSS teams. And then a big part of my responsibility now is to meet with teacher teams at least once a month around, again, data analysis around social and emotional learning here in my middle school, whether we're looking at data points from pre and post test of our curriculum, or whether we're looking at multiple data points to see if students need additional supports around social and emotional wellness. I love this continuum map because this helps us anchor, and this example helps us anchor the adults in the building and how we use adult supports for this, again, universal, targeted, and intensive. So when you're building your SEL implementation program, this is a great way to map out who, the what, and the when. And this is how I map it out at my school. This is my continuum map around social and emotional learning. I have in the green here our universals, Second Step curriculum. We're anchoring it to our PBIS framework. I mentioned MTSS, but PBIS again. And then our tier 2, small groups, check in, check out, 2 by 10s, and I'll explain those a little bit more. And then again, our Tier 3 intensive. And then also anchoring it to this MTSS framework. We aren't just doing something with social and emotional learning and not tracking it. So we're able to bring these data resources in order to progress monitor and have some fidelity measures as well. Same thing we do for academics, we're doing for social and emotional wellness. So this last piece, before we get into actually some of the practices, is we're looking at sustainability. So we were talking about, first we talked about the research, and then we went into the systemic implementation, and now how do we sustain this? And so we are the SEL multipliers. We are the people in the buildings that are going to not only be the cheerleaders for this, but also making sure that we support and gently hold others accountable. And so this adult SEL piece is very important when we think about systemic SEL. I'm going to show this brief video.
Social emotional learning supports both children and adults. An effective approach to school-wide SEL provides regular opportunities for staff to cultivate their own social, emotional, and cultural competence, and to develop a sense of community.
When we think about adult SEL, we're talking about the adult's own social and emotional and cultural competence. Do they have opportunities to reflect on their own self-awareness, their own bias, their own identity, their own thoughts and feelings and understanding of who they are and how they fit in? And we're also thinking about opportunities that they have to reflect and build skills for stress management, for relationship skills.
At the Facing History New Tech High School, all educators attend training on social emotional learning.
As adults, we went through training, so you will hear teachers say, I have to have a restorative conversation with Miss So-and-so because we had words, you know, or we're not getting along or something like that. So it's modeling it with each other. So when you're doing it with the students, it's more natural, it's more organic. The other piece too is kids see when adults aren't getting along.
Some of the research has really shown us that when teachers have positive social and emotional competencies, they're more likely to be able to manage their stressors in the classroom context. They are able to provide more student choice and voice and opportunity within the classroom context. They are better classroom managers. They are actually able to manage their own stress broadly, right? So they're less likely to burn out, which has huge implications for teacher well-being, for teacher shortages and reductions and the like. So teacher SEL not only affects their students, but also has a broader context.
Principal Mark Ingoglia tried a new approach to modeling collaboration for students. He moved all the teachers' desks into one teacher workroom. This expanded the opportunities for the teachers to collaborate with one another and practice the same relationship-building skills they tried to promote with students.
We have a teacher room where all their desks are. Sure, one teacher only teaches in one room, but when they're not teaching, they're in that teacher workroom. We do our best to have teams of teachers off at the same time. They all have the exact same 80 freshmen, so they're able to collaborate every day if they want. If you're sitting in a room and something's bothering you or you need help or something, you're going to ask somebody in the room.
At the district level, Cleveland's Humanware Social Emotional Learning Department supports SEL in the schools. Their meetings begin with stress management exercises like breathing, centering themselves, and welcoming one another.
I've adapted our Humanware Executive Committee meetings that we have once a month. We now sit in a circle, so we're modeling that good circle behavior. Everyone has a voice in those meetings for sharing and bringing up issues of concern. Several years ago, we adopted what's called Communicate with Heart from the Cleveland Clinic. It was their customer experience program. And once it came to us, I kind of moved that to customer and colleague experience. Every staff member in our district.
So I think, and again, these videos are all embedded into this presentation that I'm going to share with you, but I think it's important to just really note that by engaging in our own social and emotional learning, we as educators enhance our own efficacy and job satisfaction. And so again, trying to mirror best practices for academics, if we are teaching a certain subject area, we are going to learn about these standards and we are going to be able to engage and empower our students to have a broader knowledge about the standards in which we are teaching. The simplicity goes for that for social and emotional wellness. By having our own competencies, we again are able to share our lived and learned experiences, but most importantly, empower students to bring their lived and cultural experiences. So social and emotional learning is not something we do to kids. Social and emotional learning is something we do with kids. And being able to really focus on our own SEL competencies. Again, the research has shown that not only are we staying in classrooms longer and have better classroom management, all of these things, but also we're able to better facilitate this work of social and emotional wellness. Again, just the sustainability piece when we're talking about how important it is to be able to know how explicitly to teach social and emotional skills and support students in this overall responsive school and classroom community. We've got these data points, teaching and modeling, building stronger relationships, these connection pieces, able to demonstrate higher levels of patience and empathy, and then that burnout again, and then again to contribute to the overall school's climate. This is that sustainability adult SEL piece. And then another data point again about behavior and able to regulate our own emotions, work more effectively with challenging students, and the research and the data points behind why adult SEL is such a pivotal foundational piece of implementing a school-wide, district-wide SEL implementation. Again, great exercises that I've embedded in here of helping us build our competencies and developing the cultivating this growth mindset and how to do this in our faculty meetings, how to do this in our PLCs, modeling, just like we would do for students, modeling adult peer-to-peer when we're thinking about adult SEL. In the sake of time, I'm not going to show this next signature practice about how to take a small step. So I told you today what we're going to talk about today. You could actually practice tomorrow, but this strategy mirrors best practices for adults and for students. And it's called the snapshot that Castle has created. Just 3 best practices to build connections and integrate SEL into all components of the day, whether we're talking about a faculty meeting or academic instruction, and it's built into a welcome, an engaging strategy, and then an optimistic closure or launch. And again, this is called Castle's snapshot of 3 signature practices. And this small video talks about how to put this into practice tomorrow at your school. Most importantly, using SEL as a leverage for equity and being able to talk about this and understanding and being able to empower adults in your building to really talk about the difference between equality and equity and using SEL, this transformative SEL, as again, the engagement piece for lived and cultural experiences and providing access. And that's what this bike demonstration of this image really shows, the difference between equality and equity and practicing this continuous improvement being able to have a bike that fits all to give access. And of course, the bike can be the metaphor for anything, but we want to make sure we're meeting people exactly where they are needed and what they need. So when again, we're talking about the sustainability, we're also going, this is the zoom out, we're thinking about all of your different stakeholders, and then also how this looks in your classrooms, your schools, and with your families. And this castle wheel really talks about, this is not something, SEL is not just something we want to have done in the classroom. We want this modeled, and we want to really partner with families and caregivers and communities. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples how to start this in your building. And then looking at these tiered, again, with that image about social emotional learning as a strategy for systemic change. This is not an intervention. And how this looks here at my middle school, we anchor again to those frameworks of PBIS and MTSS. And at the tier 1, we have the second step implementation. We teach an initial lesson every week here in what we call a flex period, extended homeroom. They're called cougar dens. And this has been a big part of me trying to create some momentum, is actually co-teaching with classroom teachers that initial lesson, or perhaps even the follow-up lesson. And then again, anchoring that to that framework. So I push in and support at the initial during the flex period of the initial lesson. And then also I have been able to get funded a social emotional learning lab here in middle school. We know that middle school is such a pivotal time in someone's growth, their mental development, their physical development, all of these things, and providing a lab, just as you would provide a reading intervention room, having a social emotional learning lab to have students be able to practice skills in real time around emotion management, around goal setting, around conflict resolution. I run 12 small groups per week during all lunch periods. And we use that MTSS framework to have students selected either by self-selection, or we're looking at data points to invite them to the lunch clubs, or what we call them. And so using that again as a tier 2, and then also running a lot of check-in, check-out tier 2 as well. And then that tier 3 is another piece that I work on with individual counseling, or something that we call here 2x10s, where for 10 days, I meet with a student for 2 minutes a day, and we just connect. We connect on, hey, what you have for lunch? What are you looking forward to for this weekend? We do not talk about grades, and we do not talk about behavior. Again, just giving students a person that they can connect to, and again, talk through and process through some of these social and emotional skills that they're working on. And these are pictorial examples of how the zoom out and zoom in can look at their different target audiences. So in the top left corner tomorrow, we're having our first adult wellness peace pause room, where I have created a room in our building for the first 3 hours of the day for all 3 different grade levels during their planning. We'll be able to come in that room. I have therapy dogs, I have flavored water, and I'm going to have just nice lighting, and it will be a place and a space to exhale and relax and take a break, because we know that we can't pour from an empty cup. Again, modeling these social and emotional wellness competencies of social and self-awareness. When I was in the elementary school, we did a community campaign, Empathy for All, where we had an extension of our second step lessons about really thinking about empathy. It was student led, and we did a penny drive to and partnered with a international nonprofit where we raised enough money to send 2 young girls to school in Niger. And again, that was student run, but again, thinking about those different target audiences and being able to think more even globally of how this social and emotional learning can look in your building. The bottom right, family portrait night, again, thinking about families and members of your stakeholder group. We did a family portrait night where we had people come in. I had a photographer volunteer his time. This was around Christmas, so we did Christmas cards for everybody that they could, we gave them a digital image that they could do their own Christmas cards and send them out. But it was a way for us to connect with our families. But we also highlighted social and emotional skills that our students were working on, that we were able to connect those back with parents. And then the 2 bottom pictures in the bottom are parts of my small groups, but my social and emotional learning labs now. So the labs, while they're very intentional, we do a lot of our skill sets through games and affirmations, and in lab time, learning how to problem solve, learning how to lose, learning how to play board games that almost seem like a lost art among many of our students. So that is how my SEL labs work here at my middle school. So in kind of rounding the conversation up, you know, want to really bring it back to the research, the framework, the adult capacity and sustainability, and then repeat, almost like this continuous cycle of how we would problem solve or how we would look at anything academically. So I'm going to pause for a second. Sometimes I feel like it's like drinking from a fire hydrant when I'm doing a presentation. I have so many things I want to tell you and show, so many things I want to show you, but I do want to pause to see if there's any questions before I want to launch or have this optimistic closure that I was talking about earlier, one of those signature practices. Any questions for me about the implementation models, about the multi-tiered implementation?
So I'll give folks just a moment, but do want to share with you, Heather, that the term SEL multipliers is very much appreciated by the group. And we've got one of our participants saying that it needs to be a hashtag.
Well, we need to start that, right? We are SEL multipliers. And I think that we, and we've been doing this work for a really long time. You know, I sometimes feel that when I talk about social and emotional learning and I talk to a very veteran people who've been in education for a long time, we just have now the science and the data behind your gut and intuition that's been in practice for a long time. And just like with anything, when we know better, we do better. And we've become much more strategic in our implementation. We've become much more targeted. And I think that we have, as educators, have become much more aware of the needs of all of our target audiences, to include parents, to include teachers, and of course, to include students.
Absolutely. And I think that whether it's the kind of the nice refresher around the conversation, or for some of our districts in our state or across the nation that are really working on building out these frameworks or kind of starting to get momentum, it's so nice to have the resource and have the conversation, especially the place that we are within the research. So it looks like we don't have any questions currently. And I know folks are going to be very much, Charleston County schools are doing such great work. So nothing but positive feedback. Imagine that we can go ahead and probably move towards close, and reminding everyone that we are going to be sharing this resource. And if you have any questions after the presentation, you can always reach out to Heather or those of us here at BASC. So I will turn myself back into an apple.
Thanks, Taylor. And I want to say thank you for all of your help and support with this. And all of you, thank you. So we're going to launch on this video. I feel like that educating the head and the heart is where we are going to make the most momentum in supporting the whole child, right? We need students to be ready to learn, but we also need to meet their needs and the heaviness of the past 2 years and be able to give them and empower kids with these skills that will be able to sustain them both in and out of the classroom. So I'm going to end on this. One of my favorite all-time videos.
I'd say the thing that gives me the most hope is that we have found common cause across political differences, and at a time in the country where political differences seem to divide us on everything. I have found myself in meetings, in discussions, in dialogues with people who lean very conservative and people who lean very progressive. And I don't mean they agree on everything, but they're talking and they're listening to one another. I think the thing that's inspired me the most is to believe that in this moment, education might actually be a source of healing, not a part of the culture wars, but a part of a cultural peace. I think the thing that concerns me the most that I've been seeing recently is a sense of frustration. The job seems too big. I don't want people to think that way. We can change the course of education. We can make schools places that educate both head and heart. It's a lot of work. But I at least remember that there was a time in our history when someone said, let's go to the moon, and let's do it fast, and no one knew how to do it. And that was pretty complicated. This is pretty complicated. I say, let's do it again. Let's go to the moon. Let's change schools. It's going to take a lot of science, a lot of practice, a lot of resources, a lot of goodwill, a lot of trust, a lot of patience, a lot of confidence in each other, a lot of capacity to work across these lines. But if we stay on course with the North Star of really changing the way we educate both head and heart, we can do it. And that's what I hope. We don't lose our passion for the big challenge.
So I say, let's go to the moon. I love that. I think that, if no one has told any of you today, you are in the right place at the right time doing the right thing. And I cannot think of a more important time to support kids.
Heather, this was fantastic. Not only are you kind, but you're so knowledgeable and you clearly care so much about the work. We are incredibly grateful to have had you present today. Charleston County School District is certainly very lucky to have you working alongside the district as well as directly with the students. We want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. I am going to put up just a brief 2-question post-survey poll. If you all wouldn't mind filling that out while I offer a few more words of gratitude. Heather, you've got nothing but positive feedback in our chat today. They said, thank you so much for inspiring us. You are so inspiring. Thank you for launching us. They're very excited about having the PowerPoint to be able to refer back to. And we are just so very thrilled that we're able to archive this resource for the Southeastern School Behavioral Health community, as well as our BASS districts on our YouTube channel. So we know that not only will you have had the opportunity to touch those that were registered today, but it'll be something that folks can look back on and have access to moving forward. So thank you so much, Heather. I genuinely appreciate it. On behalf of the community in Basque, we are very grateful for you. And we hope that we get to connect again here very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you again for the opportunity. I truly appreciate it. Everyone have a great dry afternoon.
All right. Thank y'all so much. Have a wonderful evening, and we will look forward to seeing y'all at the upcoming conference in April. Have a fabulous night until we meet again. Bye now. All right, Heather. Bye again.
Bye. Take care.
You as well.